now.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. So we're super excited to have Tim Brown, the CEO of Tradewater, speaking for us tonight. You all saw the event description, but Tradewater is a mission-based project development company focused on the collection and destruction of high-impact greenhouse gases, most notably old refrigerants, which are up to 10,900 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And Tradewater has prevented the equivalent of over 4.6 million tons of CO2 from being released to the atmosphere since 2013. And yeah, there's no mandate anywhere in the world to collect and destroy these refrigerants, even though they've mostly been phased out of production. So the Tradewater's work is super, super important in the fight against climate change. And I personally have been very excited for this talk, as I've been I read about this issue like 5 years ago and was wondering who is working on this. And it's very exciting to see that someone is. And we're gonna have Tim talk to us now about their work. So thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you, and hi everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight to hear about destroying greenhouse gases, which is a super fun thing to do. So I have some slides I want to share just to kind of go orient you on this work and what we're doing and why it's important and where we do it, and then would look forward to hearing your ideas and reactions and general discussions. So if that's all right, I'm going to try to share my screen and pull this up, except I want to get it to the beginning. It's not quite teed up. There we go. All right, can you all hear me? Someone nod. Okay.
Yeah, we can, and it's a beautiful logo. Wow.
Why, thank you. It was made by the very fine people at Purpose in New York City. So I am the CEO of Tradewater, and it's been my pleasure to have co-founded this company with a really neat guy, my partner, Gabe Plotkin, who's not the hedge fund Gabe Plotkin person in the news lately. He's a different one, an environmentalist, Gabe Plotkin. But we are really focused on climate change, where as it was introduced, we are a project development company. We collect and destroy greenhouse gases, and that's because we are in this crisis that you all know all about. And we take it seriously. It's what we do every day, and we're really seeking for scalable solutions and really focusing in on gases that people aren't otherwise collecting. So we are collecting, managing, and destroying high impact greenhouse gases. The ones that we focus on are old refrigerants. Come on, I can't get this to go. And we collect them. This is what they look like. They're in cylinders that we find in garages and in people's storage sheds. They can be stockpiled in businesses that have air conditioning and cooling systems, et cetera. And they also come in small quantities, like 12 and 14 ounce cans. They get pulled out of refrigerators and air conditioners, et cetera. But there really is no mandate to collect and destroy these pollutants. Some of you may know about the Montreal Protocol, which is done, it's one of the major environmental treaties ever, and it's done a remarkable job of preventing the production and by banning the production of chlorofluorocarbons and other ozone depleting substances. So many of these refrigerants can't be made anymore, but the Montreal Protocol said nothing about their use. So these refrigerants that were banned from production, say in 1990, are still very much in use. And it's actually quite remarkable. When I first started doing this work, I ended up buying a cylinder of this stuff, and I thought, oh, well, I'll just go buy the rest of it and we'll be done. But that is not the case. The more we look, the more we find. And it's in these cylinders that are like ticking time bombs. and would be leaking into the atmosphere, but for this work to collect and destroy. They are potent. It is this R12 that you see here is 10,900 times as potent as carbon dioxide. It's at risk of being released into the atmosphere. You may have heard of Project Drawdown, which identified refrigerant management as one of the most effective ways to mitigate climate change. They accelerate heating in the atmosphere, but they are also ozone depleting substances. And when ODS, ozone depleting substances, are released into the atmosphere, they cannot be taken out. So they can't be sequestered, say, such as like CO2 can be sequestered in trees and in forests, et cetera. That is not the case with ozone depleting substances. Once they're in the atmosphere, they're in the atmosphere. They can be short-lived, depending on the refrigerant. They can be short-lived climate pollutants, and that also accelerate climate change, and some of them are also very long-lived. And this problem is actually really quite large. So we've got Project Drawdown that's identifying this as one of the most effective things that we can do to fight climate change. Well, it turns out that collecting this stuff really is a big problem. In 2020, MIT did a really interesting modeling study and found that the potential emissions from stockpiled CFC refrigerants is the equivalent of 9 billion tons of CO2. It's roughly, it equates to about 2 million pounds of, 2 million tons of this stuff that is floating around all over the world. We also know from some of the leading modelers that if we're going to get to 1.5 degrees of warming, we can't do it without the destruction of non-CO2 gases like these. So this reservoir of CO2 that is distributed all around the world really is one of the essential things that we need to get after in order to prevent warming above 1.5 degrees. As far as we know, we're the only organization that is focused on this work globally. This picture here is from our friends in Ghana, which is our first international project that I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute, but they were a recycling company that was recycling refrigerators, and they were collecting gases, these CFC gases, and didn't know what to do with them because there was no destruction capacity in Ghana. So we came and helped them do this project and actually took all these refrigerants and ultimately got them destroyed. So our approach to this is 1 pound at a time. We find these refrigerants in these small cylinders, which you've seen pictures of, and also cans that are in garages and warehouses, et cetera. And in the United States, which is really where a lot of our work has been to date, we've collected over 1 million pounds of these refrigerants across 49 states from over 20,000 people, so individuals and businesses. So that's over 20,000 transactions in order to get to that impact, which through this small scale aggregation in the US has resulted in preventing 4.6 million tons of CO2 from being released into the atmosphere. And I think that the aggregation model that we use, to me, is both emblematic of our approach, certainly, but it's also very interesting to see that that even little small amounts, once you aggregate them up, really have a big impact, which really speaks for the value of the small act. And each and every one of these small acts really adds up. Our business model of how this all gets funded is by creating a carbon, the carbon value from the collection and destruction of something. So it's results in these carbon offset credits that end up being high quality because they meet a range of criteria. First of all, they are permanent. When we collect and destroy these refrigerants, they are gone. So we don't have to worry about, for example, a forest catching on fire or blowing down, et cetera, and thus releasing the carbon stocks at all. I mean, once we do it, it's done, it's permanent. It is also additional. So this is important in the carbon world because you don't want to take credit for something that would happen anyway. But there is no end-of-life solution for these refrigerants. There is no mandate to collect and destroy. There has been a mandate to prevent the production, as I mentioned, from the Montreal Protocol, but not to collect and destroy. So therefore, this work would not happen but for the kind of thing that we are doing. The projects have to be verified. All of our projects use a third-party verification body, and we register our credits with the American Carbon Registry and Verra, which are two of the leading registries. There's social responsibility here. That is in the form of economic development. We've injected over $30 million into local communities because, as you know, in this small scale aggregation bit, we're actually putting dollars in the hands of just regular people, and it adds up over time. And make it easy. We have to make it these projects fully transparent and make it easy for people to acquire our offset credits. And that's if you look at our website, you'll see how that works, and I can talk a little bit about that if you'd like. So we leverage these the sale of carbon offset credits to finance our projects, our new projects. And I like to say that it's very strange that this refrigerant is really more valuable when it doesn't exist. In fact, it's one of the things that I don't know anything else that you know, is worth more when after it's destroyed. But that is the case. The carbon value, because of that high global warming potential, is you know, is so strong that we're able to, when we sell these credits, we're able to finance the ongoing project. So we work on this continuous reinvestment where we begin by identifying, finding these refrigerants, we collect them, we aggregate the little bits into larger quantities, we send them off for destruction, we get them verified. Once they're verified, carbon offset credits are issued. We then sell those carbon offset credits, and then we reinvest that money into new projects. A good example of this is leveraging is the work in Ghana. And so here we partnered with City Waste Recycling, as I mentioned, to collect and destroy their refrigerants that they had collected through their recycling program. So we went to go do that work, and we ended up finding just a huge amount of it. We thought we were just going to find, you know, whatever they had collected from the refrigerators they were recycling, but instead we found this huge stockpile. So we ended up being kind of nervous about that because we didn't want to take all of it in the event that we couldn't finance the whole project. So we took some of it. We took about 4,000 pounds of it in order to pilot this international project, which really there was only one other project like it. So we needed to find a buyer for those credits in order to go back and get the rest of it. So Intuit ended up being our buyer. Intuit is a very interesting company. You might know them from QuickBooks and Mint and those sorts of financial products, but they have a very progressive sustainability director named Sean Kinghorn, who pioneered an approach with Intuit that they would become net zero times 50 by 2030. So as a company, they don't really emit that much CO2 because they're a software company. They've got offices, et cetera, but they don't really manufacture anything. So their footprint is actually kind of small. So they really see that their times 50 net zero impact is going to come from projects like this and supporting projects like this that end up collecting and destroying gases. So they were a buyer of ours. We were able to take the funds and go back and get the rest of that stockpile. So the first project was 19,000 tons. We sold it to Intuit, which then allowed us to go and create 135,000 more tons. So that's sort of the cycle that we're working on. So now, as a result of that first international project, we have the opportunity to scale this around the world. So this map depicts where we have completed projects, in the United States being the vast majority of it, but then you can see Ghana over here. We are just about to finish a project from the Dominican Republic. It's actually being destroyed, I think, next week or the week after next. We did the whole thing virtually and got it over here in COVID times, and then got it to the United States, and it's going to be destroyed. But meanwhile, we have projects being developed in Latin America, and in Africa, and in the Middle East, and in Asia. So it's been really very exciting to realize that we can leverage this work in order to go after it around the world and do our very best to address that 9 billion tons of remaining CO2e from these gases that could release into the atmosphere. And of course, we have a sense of urgency because we got to do this now. We got to do this in the next 10 years and do our very best to prevent catastrophic climate change. And we think that we can get this to scale. Here are more specifics on the regions and the projects that we are working on now. So it's things are underway. I mentioned Dominican Republic is about done. Honduras is next up. We've got development going on in Guatemala, Chile, and Argentina. All of this is going to happen in 2021. So is South Africa. Kenya and Senegal are lagging a little bit. Saudi Arabia would happen in 2021. Thailand is a huge project, and that would move into 2022. US, we're chugging along. We will likely do about 1 million to 1,200,000 tons this year. We also have some other refrigerant type projects, which is reclaimed HFCs in order to displace the production of new HFCs. So that's a little project that's underway. And then we're doing the first halon destruction project. And halons are fire suppressants, but they're also ozone depleting substance and very potent greenhouse gases. And our first halon project is going to be destroyed, I think, over this weekend. So what is it that people can do to support this work? And I'm happy to say that, you know, in 2020, we wanted to create more of a community of supporters, of people who would be interested in this project type and joining us in this quest to collect and destroy. And the best way that they can do that is, frankly, to buy carbon offset credits. They can use our calculators on our sites and figure out what their carbon footprint is and mitigate it through the purchase of carbon offset credits, either in a one shot or in a subscription base. We're trying to make it cheap and easy for people to join in this work. And this map shows where what we call our climate heroes are. Of course, we got a whole lot in the United States, most of them right now. However, it's interesting to us to see that, you know, there's people in Europe and in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Iceland, etc., that are joining us and are excited about this project type. When they hear about it, they appreciate the additionality and the permanence of the work, and thus they want to be involved. So this is one way that we're really hoping to organize as many people as we can to join us in this project. So I mentioned earlier what we see to be the power of aggregation in terms of collecting the stuff even at very small amounts, but aggregating it up. The same is really true with building a market, or building the awareness and thus the demand for the carbon benefit from that work. We also have a good role for companies to play, because just as much as this material is in stockpiles and old tanks and consumer quantities, etc., they're also in chillers and in pieces of equipment in buildings, air conditioning, etc. So we are working on now is building what we're calling the Catalytic Coalition, where we are hoping to organize a bunch of companies that would be making a commitment to eliminate the CFCs in their systems by 2025 and the HCFCs, which were the original replacement for CFCs, but are still potent greenhouse gases, by 2030. And the way that they would do that is to join up and then do an inventory to figure out how much they have in under management, like what kind of volumes of greenhouse gases are they managing, and then let's figure out conversion strategies to accelerate the conversion to low GWP systems by these dates. So that's the approach that we're taking. We just got it kicked off in terms of recruiting. We're going to do a public announcement of this through GreenBiz, through a webcast at GreenBiz on the end of March. And then we hope to do a side event at COP26 in Glasgow that would showcase the commitments that some very large companies that have huge portfolios of buildings and facilities, et cetera, to show the commitment that they're making to get rid of these gases. So that's what it's going to take. We like to say, of course, that together is really the only way that we can prevent a climate crisis. And that's kind of the work that we're doing here, is to find all those partners and people who will join us in the work and help us do this around the world. So that is what I do, and that is what Tradewater does, and the project type that we're working on. I have to say I was really interested in learning more about effective altruism and sort of understanding kind of your all's perspective on some of this work. I come from the nonprofit sector, so I left the a nonprofit organization that I had founded, was called the Delta Institute. I left it in 2008 because I was really interested in, frankly, raising more money for impact work, and sort of felt like, you know what, I wonder if by tapping into or figuring out how it is that these kind of projects can be connected to sort of larger scale systems, I just was curious as to whether that would be a more effective way to get to scale. So that's what I did. I started out just on my own as a project developer, and that was in 2008. And I got absolutely creamed. It was that at that time the economy was tanking, and nevertheless I hung on. And it wasn't really until I sort of got into this project type that the economic model started to work. And that is because we were able to find people that valued the carbon benefit of destroying these gases. Much of it was assisted by the compliance market in California and the cap and trade program, but now growingly in this voluntary space. So it's sort of interesting to me to think about how it is that some of the levers of the economy that, quite frankly, have been utilized to screw up the environment can be used to help clean it up and to prevent this kind of crisis from happening. So anyway, I get asked from time to time, and including we were interviewed by Giving Green, why isn't it that I didn't do this work as a nonprofit? How come you're not a nonprofit? Surely you could do this as a nonprofit. And I actually don't think that's correct. I don't think I could have done it in a nonprofit context. And particularly when I think about the fact that we've been able to spend $30 million on buying refrigerant from people. I mean, I just can't imagine raising money from a foundations to do that. They would have thought I was nuts. And even when I was pitching projects, when I was at the Delta Institute, there were lots of times that people thought I was nuts anyway about the sort of projects that I was cooking up. But this one required such this was very risky. It was went out on a limb to do the work, and to raise that money, really took a lot of cooperation from banks and others to help bridge the cash flow challenges in order to get this thing to a scale where it could fund itself, and not only that, but throw off enough money to extend the work and expand it now globally. So anyway, I think about my time in the nonprofit sector, very finally. I've also done a lot of work on boards and even on foundation boards, but I really have come to want to try to find more solutions to particularly environmental problems that are not beside, that are not sort of, other, but instead are integrated more into what we do. I would love to see more economic development that was regenerative, that really took these issues seriously from the get-go, as opposed to an afterthought of something that had to be cleaned up and addressed later after we've all made our living. I'm interested in to what extent can we create jobs and opportunities for people that are really about environmental protection, and that also are about community benefits, et cetera. So anyway, that's kind of the point of view, I guess, that I've taken in building the company, and my partner has as well. And we'll see how it goes, but I'm really interested in your thoughts and what you think about this, and as you pursue your work in effective altruism, sort of how do you think about that relative to kind of the for-profit versus non-for-profit model on some of the challenges that we all face?
That's a great question.
I'll stop. I'll let you all jump in.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. This is extremely fascinating. Like, I had no idea about any of this. This is so remarkable. And then also, I'm glad that you brought that up. I know Will McCaskill, who's kind of the intellectual figurehead of the movement, is very, very bullish on entrepreneurship, and he does not want people to just consign themselves to lives of poverty and having to beg and scrounge for foundation capital. So he and many others in the effective altruist movement share that sentiment, as far as I could tell, at least, that we want it to not just be a side project or something that we do for charity and pity. We actually do want it to become the mainstay, and we want it to be a social entrepreneurial venture. So it's a cresting movement, and I'm glad that it's kind of the sentiment is shared. But it sounds like we have a ton of questions from you. I'm scrolling up the chat, and there are lots and lots and lots of questions. So I'd love to move into the Q&A section, if that's all right, because I want to make sure we have a lot of time for it. Caroline, can you unmute and ask your question about the estimated global total of these refrigerants?
We can also read the question.
Yeah, that might make more sense. I guess that might be slightly more efficient. GP, thanks, Rishi. I'll read your question then. What is the estimated global total of these refrigerants? That is, what % have you destroyed or are aiming to destroy per year?
So we've destroyed over 1 million tons. It's probably more like 1.2 or 1.3 million tons. But we are nowhere near where we need to be. So we've done 4.6 million tons of CO2e versus 9 billion tons of CO2e that are estimated to remain around the world. There's a lot more work to do, for sure. So that, and I would say that, right now, so the very first year that we did this, the total volume of CO2e that we did was 50,000 tons. And now we're up to we'll do 1.5 million tons this year. We hope to do 3 million tons per year and have that infrastructure in place by the end of 2022 so that it could hum along to do that volume. And then we'll see what happens, whether we can goose it up from there. But much of that will depend on how effective we are on the international work and building identification and collection networks around the world that are sustaining, and how good we are at finding this stuff. So that's the big lift.
Gotcha. Yeah, great. That's amazing. 3 million per year is a ton. Caitlin asks, why aren't there any binding mandates to tackle this issue? Seems politically feasible as there's no opposition force.
so that the cost of collecting and destroying is really high. So unless there is a sufficient demand or a funding, well, there is no funding stream to collect and destroy. So the political will has been about banning the production, which has been a huge benefit. I mean, the legacy that we're talking about is pretty staggering. But imagine if we were continuing to produce these gases. So that is it's a great thing. But there's no so you can turn it off through regulation. You could say you're not going to do it anymore. We're going to ban it and sunset the production. But then what do you do with all the leftover stuff? Who's going to pay for that? So there has been no mechanism to pay for it, which is why the carbon market actually does create that mechanism. As people value the carbon benefit, that's what will pay for it. So that is growing. It's sort of proved itself in the United States, particularly in California. So the question will remain, can it be done around the world? And that's, I think, what we'll find out. We are finding out now.
Mm-hmm. Caroline also asked, what is the estimated metric tons averted per dollar?
Per dollar what? Per dollar. So can you clarify the question?
I don't know, Caroline, want to unmute?
I was just curious about the cost efficiency. So like how many dollars does it take to avert 1 metric ton by destroying the refrigerants? So I know that it wouldn't, I guess, like your total budget, it would be like the amount you've destroyed divided by your total money spent.
Yeah. So we have, so we are charging $15 a ton. So that is our cost to do that. So embedded in that cost, however, is the new development work too. So I don't have those exact numbers for you, but it's, we're in that ballpark. So we and our costs, it's we view the cost as the identification, collection, destruction, and verification. All of that we view as part of that cost.
That's for $15, you said?
Mm-hmm.
And how does that compare? That's Nirav's question. How does Tradewater's cost of carbon offsets compare to other organizations?
Oh, it's expensive. So you can get landfill gas for $1, or you can get forestry projects for a lot less, like $10, $6 or whatever. I mean, you can also spend more than $15 a ton too. But I think that our costs are high because we have to collect, transport, destroy, et cetera. And there is a benefit to the credit. We view it as a premium credit because of its additionality, because of its permanence. There's no chance for it to be released into the atmosphere once it is destroyed. And it's every project is a new project. So if you're doing a landfill gas project, for example, you're putting in your flares at a landfill, and then that's just going to keep cranking out, credits because the methane continues to produce. Each of these projects has to be developed anew every time we do it. And when we do a project, we tend to do them in 100,000 ton chunks. So we collect enough refrigerant in order to create that volume, and then we destroy it. So that's the sort of the size that we do it in.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Ashley asks, could you tell us more about the technology of resequestering these quote unquote stubborn greenhouse gases? Are there side effects of these technologies?
So the sequestration of greenhouse gases really is, and the best example of that is forestry and trees. And so those are, you hear all about those. I mean, it's a big part of the solution to the climate crisis, is to ensure that our forests are expanding and certainly not being deforested. So that is like the principal sequestration technology. There's also carbon removal, and there's also sequestration in a capture and storage, I guess, which would be more of an industrial process of taking CO2, say from a power plant, before it's released into the atmosphere, and instead injecting it into the ground for long-term storage. Those would be some examples.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Nirav asks, what are the successor to refrigerants. The podcast talked about ammonia.
Yeah, so there are 0 GWP, like natural refrigerants, which would include ammonia, which has a GWP of 0, and there's also CO2, which has a GWP of 1. There are other forms of refrigerants that are less in global warming, and that's kind of what's happening, is that you're seeing a reduction of the use of these higher GWP refrigerants, and they're being replaced with lower ones. So there's that's a good technical question that we can provide you with more information on, in terms of like what brands and what systems, et cetera, that would take those refrigerants.
Cool. Caroline asks, how does the Kagali deal play into your work?
So the Kagali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol focuses on hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which were one of the replacements to the CFCs and the HCFCs. They are not ozone depleting substances. However, they are also potent greenhouse gases. So the Kagali Amendment is like the Montreal, well, it's an amendment to the Montreal Protocol, but it's working on the phased in, the bans and the phase outs of these HFCs. So it's going to be the same sort of deal, which is good news, where the world will stop making HFCs. However, they're broadly distributed. They're broadly distributed all over the world, and they're in systems. So the very same problem that we face with the CFCs and the HCFCs, we will face with the HFCs. So just because we are banning the production does not mean we're banning the use. So there'll be a need to get after those refrigerants just the same way as we're getting after these current nasty ones.
Gotcha. Jacob has a question, and he will ask it himself because his turn is up.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim. Very interesting. Yeah, I get a question. The main question I wanted to ask is one that I think you would hear a lot, or maybe even have already heard a lot from effective altruism type people, which is to what extent are you moving the needle, or can you move the needle? Like, suppose over the course of the years to come, you were able to destroy all of the refrigerants that you're looking at, all of these products, and understood that on a per unit basis, they're extremely, intense. They have an intense effect relative to carbon or CO2 or to other things. But how big a portion of the whole problem that we face as a society do these refrigerants make up? Have you looked at that, or like, do you have any numbers on that?
I don't have any numbers off the top of my head, but I did consult with one of the better modeling organizations around, called Climate Interactive, and they've done a lot of the modeling for in the UN in the climate talks, in order to figure out, well, if all of these countries meet their commitments, will we get to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, et cetera? And so it's sort of looking at the cumulative effect. And the answer there is that it is unlikely that we will get to 1.5 degrees without going after these gases, without these sort of F gases. So it'll be the CFCs, the HFCs, other similar types of gases that are still out there. And this is where the sort of non-CO2, the importance of the non-CO2, the short life climate pollutants really come into being. So the solution to the climate crisis is certainly to go after CO2, but you got to get at this other stuff too. So it's not, and by volume it's not as huge as CO2, of course, but by impact it's pretty important. So that's the idea, is to go after both of them. But in terms of scale, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. Like, how much can we move the needle? I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, by us toiling away and traveling around the world and trying to get 3 million tons per year out, I hope it'll move the needle. I don't know whether we'll be able to see, how much we'll be able to see it, or if it'll be fast enough. But when you've had a little taste of collecting and destroying greenhouse gases and know that you can do it, you simply can't stop doing it. I mean, it's work that must be done. And if you can do it, you should do it. And I think our hope is that this activity, along with what everybody else is going to do too, and both in a regulatory and non-regulatory way, and in fact, by virtue of what we all decide to do and choices we make as individuals, that all of that aggregated up will move the needle. That is our hope.
Amazing. Chris asked a question. I was wondering too, like, what is there a fraud risk? Because how do you, this Chris, in Chris's words, how do you verify that these are pre-Montreal stockpile protocols, pre-Montreal protocol stockpiles? Because there seems to be an incentive to create new stockpiles and sell them to Tradewater.
So you're getting at the a question of perverse incentives. And this is where it gets trickier when you're focusing right now on the HFCs, for example, because they can continue to be produced. Whereas the CFCs, which is really what we're mainly focused on at the moment, those can't. Those are banned from production. So there's the additionality. That's how the additionality comes into being. There was some examples of, if I get this right, the production of, I think it was R22 resulted in a byproduct, which was R23 or something like that, that was also a potent greenhouse gas, and people were destroying that, but it was actually being produced. And that, it was exposed as fraud and addressed. So that has happened from time to time. The people that we buy this from are there's no way they would be making this material. We're talking about, old retired HVAC technicians, or somebody whose grandfather just died and they went into their storage shed and found a whole bunch of cans and didn't know what to do with them. And it's really the dribs and drabs that we're getting. It's not really an industrial activity. So that's how we kind of safeguard against the perverse incentive.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense. Patrick asked a long question, which is, do you have any reactions to the U.S. legislation to align with the Kagali Amendment phase down of refrigerants that got passed in the last stimulus package? And number two, are you concerned about the rapid growth globally of heat pumps for heating and cooling that use HFCs? And number three, are there refrigerants that are not profitable to destroy?
So I'm very excited about the AIM legislation, and that the U.S. will join the rest of the world in ratifying the Kagali Amendment, which is what seems to be happening. The Senate will need to do that, and the United States will become part of the international dialogue again, which is great. I think that as a result of this, that a more rapid conversion from HFCs is imminent. That's going to need to happen, and they're going to need, the civil society is going to have to figure out how to accelerate the conversion of systems that don't use HFCs any longer. And that's going to take time. I think that you can't, it's just not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take commitment to do that work and figure out how there's sort of a just transition, and that people are going to need cooling. So you can't sort of, turn it off just on a dime. You've got to figure out a just transition that sort of works its way to a low GWP. But the fact that now the whole world is going to be banning the production of HFCs will put us on that path. And hopefully, as we may have learned from the Montreal Protocol, that just because you ban it doesn't mean you can't use it. So that body of work really needs to move forward. And as far as heat pumps go, I don't know enough about that. So I won't be able to answer that question.
And the last question about the refrigerants that are not profitable to destroy.
Yeah. Well, right now we destroy the stuff that's so potent, so it is effective to do that. The R22 is an HFC which is prevalent. it is, that the GWP of that is about 1,800 or 2,000, something like that. That is barely profitable to do. It depends if you have to buy the refrigerant or not. If you can acquire the refrigerant and eliminate that as a cost, you could work on its destruction. And but again, you got to find the parties on the other end that are going to value the carbon benefit and pay for it. Just as a little anecdote, right before this call, I was sent a spreadsheet. I showed you that slide of the Catalytic Coalition, and there's a company that is considering joining us on that, and they sent me their inventory of refrigerants. They had over something like 1.2 million pounds of R22 distributed at 1,700 facilities in the United States, and the total carbon value of that was about 930,000 tons of CO2 that they have under management. So that's R22. It would be spectacular to get all that and work on the accelerated conversion of all of those units and get that stuff destroyed. So that's our job, is to figure out how can you do that so that it works economically, both in terms of the paying for the destruction part, but also getting, in this case, this company to convert all their systems at 1,700 facilities. I mean, that's a tall order, but that's the work. That's what we got to do. We got to figure out how to do that, and we got to figure out how to do it now. We can't wait and dilly-dally and risk those pollutants being released into the atmosphere.
Patrick, it sounds like you had a follow-up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just really, really quickly. You said that it stops being profitable somewhere around a GWP of, you said 1,800 or 2,000, something like that.
That's on the lower end of what we do. It all depends on whether we have if we have to buy the refrigerant.
Okay.
People who are smart about this stuff and have it know that there's a carbon value to the refrigerant, so they tend to jack up the price. And so, if we can figure out a way to get it without having to pay a lot of money for it, then we can destroy that lower GWP stuff.
Okay.
Sweet.
Yeah, the HFCs that are going into new heat pumps, basically everywhere, like every VRF heat pump system that's being installed is now, it's R410A, which has a very similar GWP. And that stuff's just getting, purchased and installed, and it's going everywhere, and it's just all over the place. Like the current standard for heat pumps is R410A, and that's just getting built right now. So I'm thinking ahead to when those need to get disposed of. Are you concerned about that?
I am concerned about that. I think that once the refrigerant is in these systems and the systems are distributed, it's super hard to get it out. So I would much prefer to see a more forward-looking manufacturer design something that doesn't have them. There was somebody that was looking at cooling systems in sub-Saharan Africa, was asking me about that, and were there refrigerators that could be solar powered? And I got really sort of interested in that, but really wanting to make sure that, God, if you're going to be putting cooling systems in where they've never been before, don't use these, find ones that are natural refrigerants or 0 GWP if you can, or low GWP. So anyway, I am concerned about that. And the 410A is an HFC. That one will be, there'll be more of a mandate to use reclaimed 410A. So at least there will be less of a reliance on new production before the bans take place. But nevertheless, what we've got to do is accelerate the conversion of technology to low GWP. We just simply have to.
That relates into Rishi's question, which is in terms of just size. 3 million tons a year is very impressive, but with 9 billion out there, how do you think that we can address the rest of those refrigerants, and how can your work scale to, let's say, 10 or 100 times the work that it's doing now?
Well, I don't know. I was hoping you would have good ideas about that. I mean, one of the big barriers to getting to that scale is destruction capacity. So this is why this makes this work so hard, is that there aren't very many places around the world where you can destroy it. So I think that if we were able to develop the collection networks, we would run into a roadblock on the destruction capacity. So I think part of our vision would be an increase of destruction capacity, sort of strategically located around the world. So I think if we could do that and create a solution for countries that are interested in dealing with this problem, then that would help it out. I mentioned to you the Ghana project. I mean, Ghana didn't have any destruction capacity, which is why they called us. And they're not alone. Most countries don't. And so, for example, you know, we've been bringing, we brought Ghana material to the United States. So that's not the most efficient path, but that's what we had to do. We brought the Dominican Republic material to the United States. The reason is because Ghana and the Dominican Republic do not consider refrigerants, these CFCs, as hazardous. So they were able to get them into the United States, avoiding what's known as the Basel Convention. And the Basel Convention otherwise requires shipments of hazardous material to be approved for transit by all the ports of call from its origin to its destination. So the United States didn't sign the Basel Convention, so it doesn't need to comply with it, but most countries did. So if you have, for example, our Honduras material will likely be subject to the Basel Convention, meaning even though it's close to the United States, we can't bring it to the United States, we got to bring it to Europe. So those are the sort of logistical barriers, and the access to destruction capacity would be a barrier to getting to scale. I think that we'll see what happens in terms of lasting collection infrastructure in country to see whether we can get that to scale. It'll be a race.
We're almost out of time. We have two questions. Okay. One from
and we skipped a question about the Catalytic Coalition.
Oh, yeah. Good point. The Catalytic Coalition sounds like a really fantastic initiative and a great way to scale. Obviously, it's early, but do you have a sense of how much additional refrigerant destruction this will lead to?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, today we just found, about almost 1 million tons with one company with 1,700 facilities, and that's a U.S.-based entity. I mean, we'll see how well we do. I think it would be so much fun if we could get some big multinational companies to agree to this. And if nothing else, they should look at their inventories and understand what they're managing. And if they don't choose to do something about it, then that's, then that speaks, it reflects on them. But, hopefully they would realize that, this is a greenhouse gas that only they can go after. And they're the ones that are now owning it and controlling it. So it's kind of up to them. But I think that, one company worth 1 million tons, how many companies are there that have facilities? So this stuff is all over the place.
All right, well then I have real quick, one last question. How do you not get demoralized or despondent in the sheer scale of the work that you're doing, which seems almost Sisyphean in nature? How do you maintain the optimistic charm that you've clearly got?
I don't know. I think that it doesn't do any good to get buried in the weight of the problem, because then certainly the problem isn't going to go away. I do believe that the only way out of this is for everybody to do something, and this is what I've found to do. And as long as I have the energy and can, and can do it, I'm going to do it. And I don't know. I guess I should say that the other thing that's sort of interesting about the climate crisis is the opportunity that surrounds it too. I see, a lot of creativity and exciting things going on as people are coalescing to address this. And certainly the change of administration really helps in the United States and giving a new kind of lease on life on some of this stuff. But I think that there's more and more people who want to participate in a society and in an economic system that is regenerative, that is about making things better, not worse. And I think that we all have a chance to work on that stuff. And when you think about this evolution of our economy to a net zero economy, et cetera. I mean, that's a big change. There's big opportunity, and there will be jobs that are created because of people will make their living making that happen. And so I catch some enthusiasm and optimism just by that. The climate crisis scares the hell out of me. I think it is a crisis, and I think we are racing against time. So we've all got to jump in here and do what we can. And even if it's a little thing that you do, it will add up. It'll make a difference. And so that's, I guess, how I try to do it. I will confess some days I'm better at it than others. So,
well, here. I think it's a very inspiring place to end. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming to talk with us. If you liked this event, there are others like it at effectivealtruism.nyc/newsletter. You can subscribe and find out when we host awesome talks like this. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Tim, thank you so much. This has been an immensely and informative discussion. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Good night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.